Now, in other news, GB News has obtained footage filmed yesterday morning which shows migrants that successfully crossed the English Channel. They made it to a beach in Folkestone called the Warren. The footage, as you can see, shows young families and teenagers being given water on the beach by border staff, while other migrants were picked up by a border force vessel.
GB News is seeking a comment from the Home Office. Now, we're joined by Inaya Folarin Iman, who's been investigating the story and joins us live in the studio. Thanks for making the time. So tell us, what's been happening across the Channel and what are the latest numbers that we know?
Well, we know that in this year alone, 11,000 people have made that incredibly dangerous and perilous journey, and record numbers of people have taken that journey. Last year, 8,000 people took the journey, and in 2019, 2,000. And in 2018, 300. So we are seeing significantly more people. But having spoken to the Refugee Council and Amnesty UK, they say that actually the overall numbers of asylum applications isn't necessarily higher, but it's people making this particular journey. And some of those reasons are complex, but one of them is in relation to the pandemic, where flights have been shut down. And actually that has also caused other routes that migrants would otherwise be taking, such as other resettlement routes, to be closed. So we're seeing more people take this particular journey, but not necessarily more people applying for asylum in general. But it does come as a very visceral, a very visual image when you see those numbers. And it does remind you that actually successive governments have been trying to deal with this issue, but so far none of them have actually been successful. Last month, the Nationality and Borders Bill was introduced by Priti Patel for its second reading in the House of Commons, and it had a range of measures, including empowering Border Force to detain and to look into all of this, to have better patrols and better funding. She gave £55 million to French authorities, but whether or not any of this is actually going to make a difference to the numbers remains to be seen.
The destabilisation of Afghanistan, as we've been discussing all morning on GB News and on this show, has sparked concerns that we're going to see, yet a further increase of people taking this incredibly perilous journey across the Channel, the busiest and one of the most dangerous shipping lanes in the world. What do you make of that provision that Priti Patel has laid out, 20,000 refugees over the next 5 years? So
yes, as the situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate, that is where the conversation is now moving. What should we do in terms of refugees, resettlement, or even just making sure people are safe in their neighbouring countries? And Priti Patel has introduced a bespoke new programme which she says will resettle 20,000 people over 5 years and 5,000 people in the first year. And it has been criticised as not enough. We're going to be seeing millions of people that are fleeing their homes, fleeing their own country, and the overall majority of people will go to the neighbouring countries such as Pakistan. But the question is, how many people should we take? I think it's a very difficult one. I think that obviously I do think we do have some responsibilities, particularly in how we've exited in this very disastrous way, leaving many people vulnerable. But whether or not actually resettlement is necessarily the appropriate response to the dealing with the deep structural issues that cause these migration flows, I think is a different question. And this is some of the things that Emmanuel Macron is mentioning. He has been quite reluctant to talk up the idea of taking in refugees. He's talked about the UN needing a much more coordinated response with global powers such as Russia, America and the European Union and the UK. He thinks that actually a much more coordinated international response will get much deeper to the heart of why these things are happening.
Because Syrian refugees resettled in 128 different countries. I've seen people on social media, suggesting that there's going to be thousands of Afghan refugees in their cities, but really the only numbers that I've seen from the northeast of England, which is my patch, is Northumberland, that said that they would take 3 families. So really, are we going to notice that much difference? And we're going to make such a difference? I mean, the pictures that we've seen are absolutely harrowing.
I think it is a really difficult one. So, for example, in France, there was a lot of tension that happened after the Charlie Hebdo killing, where actually 20,000 Afghan individuals in France protested against Charlie Hebdo for depicting the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. And therefore, there's tensions around questions in relation to integration and social cohesion, and whether or not we have the managerial appropriate response to be able to deal with those things. There are ways in which it has been very successful. There's also questions around, are they going to be spread equally across the country? Where are they going to move? Are they going to be in ghettoised, impoverished communities? Or are they going to have the appropriate support economically and the want to adopt the culture of Britain? And I do think there is a likelihood that they will. I mean, many of the people that are fleeing the Taliban, by implication, disagree with the Taliban and actually support broadly democracy and values of liberal democratic values. That's why they're fleeing. So I think think it's a difficult one.
We've just had Bradley Harris talking about the northwest of England and how they are welcoming with open arms refugees and they're ready to play their part. That's something that's been echoed by the northeast of England. Do you think that there is a north-south divide, and how big do you think that will be?
I think there quite possibly could be. I think, as I mentioned earlier, if it's not done in a sustainable way and wherein everybody is moving to one place, and I think that that could cause tension. But if there is this sense of social solidarity, of civic duty, and this sense of international solidarity in taking people, then I think that it can begin to dissolve some of those tensions, some of those divides that may emerge.
A lot of northeast leaders have actually called for fair distribution, which doesn't seem like the right word, but of refugees. They're saying that if we're ready to play our part, then that should be across the board. Everybody should do their bit.
I'm just reminding myself of when we knew that Boris Johnson was getting increasingly frustrated with Priti Patel for not getting a grip on what's happening in the Channel. You know, we were seeing up to 10,000 people crossing, and which was a record for this earlier in the year. Do you think that there's a sort of political ramifications for what we're seeing in the Channel for this government? You know, have they been seen to get a grip on it? There's obviously a very clear humanitarian argument, but you know, for lots of people, they see these pictures daily now of people arriving in Dover and in Kent. Do you think that there's a political fallout that the Tory government might experience because they just haven't got a grip on this?
I think that's a really interesting question. According to the polls, the British population are very supportive of tougher measures in cracking down on people taking this journey and general refugee and asylum policy in general. But I do think these heart-wrenching scenes remind us of why the UN Refugee Convention was created in the first place, where there is desperate people for no fault of their own having to take really difficult decisions and often to leave their family in order to get some safe haven. I think it reminds us of why those things are there. But I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. I think absolutely we need a managed response. We need to make sure that there's proper social cohesion and integration, taking into account the long-term effects of taking in large numbers of people over a short period of time, but also doing it in a way that makes sure it's humane, making sure that we do our part and take responsibility on the global stage.
It's unimaginable.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us, Inaya. That was a really fascinating chat, as always.
Thank you.